Hello and welcome to today's session of Monash's Form and Content. My name is Hannah Matthews. I'm Senior Curator at Monash University Museum of Art, MUMA, here in Melbourne. For our low-sighted audiences, a brief visual description of myself. I'm in my lockdown room, my home. I have long hair tied up, some light lipstick on and a pale complexion. As we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose country the campuses of Monash University are located and from where we are variously Zooming today. I'd like to pay my respects to traditional owners and elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge Aboriginal connection to material and creative practice on these lands and waterways for more than 60,000 years. Form and Content is a mix of live and pre-recorded events featuring the voices of renowned First Nations, Australian and international artists, designers, architects, curators and academics. The series engages with critical questions of our time, with our Semester 2 program focusing on ideas of disruption and resilience, together with queer perspectives on artistic practice and urban space. Today's Form and Content is a conversation between two artists, both living and working on Kaurna land in Adelaide, Virginia Barrett and Frances Barrett. I should note that Frances is also a recent graduate of Monash's Curatorial Practice PhD program. Titled Panic and Annihilation, or Of No Relation, their conversation promises to be a charged and wonderful exploration of practice, collaboration, research, and transgenerational exchange. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests.
To begin, I would like to acknowledge that both Virginia and I are holding this conversation on the lands of the Kaurna people, the custodians of the Adelaide Plains, and we would like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd like to thank Monash University Museum of Art and Senior Curator Hannah Matthews for inviting us to contribute to Form and Content. My name is Frances Barrett. I'm an artist whose practice takes the form of performance, video and sound. And I've recently taken up a position here in Adelaide at the University of South Australia as a lecturer of contemporary art. I am a 38-year-old cis woman with a pale complexion, dark hair. I'm wearing a blue jersey House of Helmuti shirt, and I'm sitting here with Virginia in their home against a concrete wall with paintings and hats hung behind us.
Yes, thank you to MUMA for the opportunity to have this conversation with Frances. It's really great. It's an enjoyable opportunity. And yes, I'm Virginia, obviously, and I am a person in their 60s. I am wearing an orange jumper, red lipstick. I have a pale complexion and very, very short grey hair. Yes, thank you for that introduction.
Thank you. So today's talk we've titled Panic and Annihilation, or Of No Relation, which will focus on Virginia's extensive practice. And when approached by Hannah to hold this conversation for Form and Content, I turned to Virginia because I feel like our conversation has spread like fungal mycelium throughout the years, covering feminism and collaboration, roasting chickens, bodies without organs, hyperstition, yoga, and recycling. And our conversations have been porous exchanges of art and life, depression and pleasure, small resistances and big concepts. And these exchanges have supported me greatly, both artistically and personally. And I first knew of Virginia from their significant role in the history of cyberfeminism, but it's through this conversation I'd like to give space for and to pull focus on their current practice and the accumulative force of their 3-decade practice. So today the conversation will give an introduction to Virginia's practice, address their recent works, Exosmosis and Rupture, unpack several thematics that sort of run through their practice, and conclude with a reading by Virginia. So we intend this conversation to sort of build slowly towards the reading, laying the groundwork for a deeper access to their practice. So to begin, maybe Virginia, could you introduce yourself introduce your practice and perhaps the use of your term transmedia artist.
Yes, so I guess I used to consider myself to be an artist with a practice that had a primary focus. And over time that has changed. So potentially in the mists of time, it used to be performance artist, and that would be my primary. I would think of that as my primary discipline, and everything else was somehow kind of supporting that or to the side of that. And through ideas that maybe I was a writer, or so. I guess transmedia to me is the best kind of descriptor for something, a practice which doesn't have a primary focus, and that is non-binary, and that where everything works together, feeding into one another. Some things sometimes recede and become kind of sense-making activities, which do in fact support, a textual outcome or a performance outcome or a sound outcome. But in general, none of these things take primacy, and they all function alongside one another in this very kind of space of what I like to kind of call sympoiesis, which is a Mary Beth Dempster term around the idea of open systems of production. So I would say, and actually we were talking about this last night, about how Frances and I both have things that we do which we might call hobbies. So, there is this great pleasure in doing things which are like somehow they don't end up in the work at the end, but they just bring you joy and pleasure. Crafting, if you like.
So transmedia and craft artist.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in how you described your practice as sort of focused on achieving a flow state. Could you explain what this flow state might be?
Yeah, well, I guess this is a good point to start talking about mental health. So the area of my research, I'm in like the 5th year of my PhD, hopefully the final year of my PhD. And my research area is panic. And panic is something I have been living with since I was a child. And it really is a hold-all term to describe a bunch of affects and experiences, moods and emotions, if you like, states of being, which might include things like dissociation, hypersensitivity, social anxiety, agoraphobia, among many, many other things. I do list thousands of symptoms in my PhD. But so the flow state is this kind of, I think it's achievable, but it's hard work. It's this state that I'm constantly trying to get to. And it's a state where I am both deeply embodied, but also in excess of myself, in that I am not self-aware and I'm not self-reflexive and I'm not doing the narrative about what I'm doing now in this moment, in this nanosecond, in this unit of time, this constant kind of narrating my life to myself and how am I feeling and what that kind of hypervigilance. So I can like exit that state of hypervigilance and become part of a flow where I'm deeply diving into it's like contentment, and I think we were saying this too, is that it's like contentment is all I could ever wish for, really. So, and I access this flow state through certain kinds of activities, and some of my creative practice lends itself to that. But it's also like I don't make a huge differentiation between things which some people would just call kind of, quotidian kind of domestic practices or something, where maybe I'm making sourdough starter, or I'm fermenting something, or I'm gardening. And those things assist me to access this state of flow in the same way that learning a new piece of software will help me to access the flow state, or like doing 3D, making 3D animation or editing video, something where I can just really deeply dive into this. I suppose some people might call that something like a meditation in action. So just this state of contentment where I'm out of hypervigilance, deeply embodied, but also in excess of myself.
And that might lead nicely to thinking about from flow to connectivity. And I think your practice often will collapse sort of the distinctions between organic forms, such as sort of fungus, and technology. So I was wondering if you could talk about the connectivities between, I guess, the internet and also how you've described the mycelial companion to the internet, the undernet. And so, this could you talk about the connectivities between organic kind of materials and the internet or data?
So obviously, I'm going to refer now to a time around the early 90s when I first came into contact with machines of computation, number crunching machines, and the internet. So I was actually introduced to computers before I was introduced to the internet, and I had no idea why my life would have any truck with computers. I was hanging naked from church spires upside down, proclaiming various things in performance at that point in time. And Francesca de Rimini, one of the founders of VNS Matrix and a dear friend, someone who I still collaborate with to this day, was the director of the Australian Network for Art and Technology. And the Australian Network for Art and Technology was running these summer schools for artists here in Adelaide, down at Technology Park. And they were on these, it was in a plastic injection molding kind of facility. And the artists would get to play with these machines. It was the whole kind of green on black screen and very much just kind of XYZ kind of locations in kind of no space, like building these things, potentially like impossible objects that were never going to be plastic injection molded, but somehow we all dove very deeply into this space. And that was my first kind of collision with these kinds of, number crunching machines. And I was like, oh, right. I don't know why, but I have a real affinity with this. And then came to live in Adelaide, worked with the Australian Network for Art and Technology, and VNS Matrix came into being. And at around the same time, the internet was happening, pre-World Wide Web. So again, bringing in my kind of neurodivergence here, I discovered a way through the internet, the early internet, Usenet, and so on, mailing lists, bulletin board systems, other kinds of kind of virtual spaces and communities where I could connect with people when I couldn't leave the house, which was often. So I, again, kind of found this way to be in excess of myself and to reach out without, having to leave my home. And this idea of kind of like, extending out into this kind of a huge space through my fingertips is very, I mean, people used to talk about, especially around Pianist Matrix, one of the critiques was that, we really kind of valorized disembodiment, which to me was like the exact opposite of what was happening. To me, this space of connectivity through the computer was deeply embodied in a very affective way. So I kind of bring that into today's work. But this sense of connecting through my fingertips, there was this idea of these kind of tendrils reaching out through the fingertips, through the keyboard in this very vibrant way to connect with the vibrancy of others. And when those kind of, tendrils connected, there was this very kind of this bodily shock, this kind of feedback into the body. And like, so you kind of this circuitous kind of, kind of feedback loop of affects kind of going between people in this space, which I don't experience now, like using, social media. These days I find very deadening, very dulling, very doom scrolly. It's a completely different situation. But there's also for me a point at which I can go too far into that space, and I do need to kind of pull out, or dissociation can really kind of, take over. So one of the things that I really like to do, I love gardening. So, I've built this, I live in a housing co-op, and I spent a lot of time kind of building a garden here. And for me, I think of the dirt as my other keyboard. So, and I have this really strong sense that I want it to be true, that when I put my fingers in the dirt, that vibrant tendrils, reach out, and vibrant tendrils are reaching back. So the mycelial network knows I'm there, and that it's like, there's this kind of alert, or these kind of messages that are passing between it and I, in the same way that it assists the trees to communicate with one another, and it assists, the rocks to, let go of their kind of, nutrients to feed the trees. And, that these messages are also kind of feeding me in a deep way that, like, I simply can't get that kind of, like psychic and kind of deeply embodied kind of nutrition in any other space.
So it's a nutritious connectivity.
It's a nutritious
through the fingertips.
Through the fingertips.
Beautiful. Yes. And maybe a question that I wanted to sort of come back to is that you hold a significant role in the histories of cyberfeminism. So I'm wondering, since the 90s, what has been your line of flight from feminism for you? I guess thinking about, from the 90s until now, What has that been, that journey?
Yeah, it's been really interesting in terms of the way feminisms have evolved and the way I have been evolving or with that, or making political decisions alongside that. So I think in terms of cyberfeminism, obviously we were for white middle class people, not all cis, but certainly privileged and had access to machines, the internet. I had a fairly kind of technophilic approach to these new media spaces at that time. But I think, and so there's a lot of insufficiencies around early kind of cyberfeminism 1.0, if you like. That is not to say that it's not been extremely useful. And even today, I know that young people are still discovering the Cyber Feminist Manifesto for the first time in their 20s. And to me, that's very humbling and beautiful and heartening. And I love that people still find something useful in it. And I feel like, it will always be like that. But we were doing something very fast. We wanted to smash something very fast. And that was like, the patriarchal kind of, techno-industrial complex, and in that way, we did not address everything. And you can't always address everything. And another thing we were talking about is this idea of public learning, and how humiliating that can be when you reflect upon your past politics or your past kind of practices, and you are so like deeply and shamefully aware of their insufficiencies. And certainly a lot of things around cyberfeminism 1.0 were not addressed, particularly kind of race. We were not kind of saying that like computing and networks were ubiquitous, but we were acting as if there was a ubiquity around those things. And truth be told, and still today, of course, it's a very it's not a globally accessible or universally accessible space. So those were conversations that needed to be had, and those were conversations that have been had. And people like Maria Fernandez, Lisa Nakamura, Faith Wilding, Sadie Plant, like so many people have, and we have personally engaged in conversations like with those people. And whenever we are doing kind of public talks, which we don't do very often these days, but Francesca and I sometimes talk about the NS Matrix in the course of talking about the history of our collaboration together. And we address these kind of insufficiencies, and I think it's super important to do that in that really public way and have that public learning. Obviously, now I don't. I think that, like, much as I love the speculative aspects of cyberfeminism and this idea that it can be anything at any time, and maybe it hasn't even happened yet, that it's this kind of hyperstitional kind of space, I also know that it's not the most important, point on my agenda. So obviously, these days my feminism is much more focused on intersectionality, anti-racism, and the addressing inequities. And I guess I just try to do that on the daily, and that is the work. It's a daily work. It's decolonizing my life, decolonizing my mind, decolonizing my life on the daily, and whatever that means, whether it's like how I consume, you know, in, you know, late capitalism, or, you know, I am a yoga teacher and I work with a yoga studio, and I try to bring programs into kind of white wellness spaces which are paying the rent, and addressing cultural appropriation. And so again, I don't see a distinction necessarily between, you know, all of the different things that I do. They're all part of my practice.
And thinking about your practice coming up, your upcoming project of X-Osmosis will be presented by Sam Stagg Museum of Art in December. And this is a new durational performance developed with M. Koenig that centers on annihilation and transformation. So I'm wondering, what is X-Osmosis, and also what is annihilation in this context?
Yes, so I'm very happy to be doing this work at Sam Stagg, and really excited to be working in that space and to be working with M. Koenig, who I've been, it's a reasonably new collaboration. We started working together a bit during COVID in online spaces. And I guess this is a culmination of a lot of things I've been working on for the last couple of years around creating electronic sound, collaborating with people to do that, working in the field of what we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but kind of ictic vocalities and unlanguaging, kind of falling out of the house of language, if you like. And this is really connected to my research into panic and my ideas or my experiences of annihilation, dissolution of subjectivity, something I mentioned before, which was being in excess of the self, and an idea of subjective evacuation. So something which happens when I experience a panic attack, and sometimes in extreme times, this might happen many tens of times a day. Very kind of rapid cycling, extreme panic to kind of high anxiety, extreme panic, kind of hope to hopelessness, these kinds of things. And when you reach that kind of point in a panic attack where there is this kind of subjective evacuation, and one of the theorists I'm reading speaks about how in states of extreme affect like fear, terror, panic, there is this kind of subjective evacuation, or this like wild kind of line of flight from the embodied self, and this kind of subjective evacuation. And it's not a mind-body split, it's something else which is more spectral. So I guess I am going off on a couple of wild lines of flight here, but it is around this kind of annihilation itself. But there's a political aspect to this as well, because I feel like this kind of like, there is something about this which enables you to really see the world as it is. And I know this is probably a contested kind of concept, but the idea that there is the world as it is, the world as it seems, but there's something agentic about this kind of evacuation of subjectivity, which allows you to kind of see the world as it is. So I can see the kind of machines of production. I can really see the kind of machinations of like capitalism. Like, you know, I am it. So, but I want to acknowledge around exosmosis the work of someone who I'm really interested in, and this is Eli Moss, who lives in Lenape-Hoking, is at the Pratt Institute and works with something called the Liminal Lab, and they're a queer, non-binary person, and they were talking one day about. In a video I was watching about imaginal discs. And imaginal discs are these things or these special cells which live inside a caterpillar. And these are the special cells which eventually become a butterfly. So this could sound like a really hokey kind of concept, you know, like, so, you know, the butterfly or the swan or whatever. But it's really just this idea of becoming soup, you know, becoming none. Complete annihilation in order to become this kind of, you know, new future which we're speculating on, or this new kind of completely new kind of systemic structure, like which bears no relation to what came before, and the necessity to completely annihilate, especially as a white person, completely annihilate privilege, completely annihilate kind of white fragility and all the tears, completely annihilate all the, you know, all the kind of resistance to, you know, coming to terms with, you know, the terrible things that we've visited upon peoples and other beings, you know, on the earth, that the necessity to completely annihilate all that in order for a new structure which I can't even name to emerge. So exosmosis, the term kind of scientifically, medically, is about fluid exiting a cell and that cell becoming flaccid, as opposed to osmosis. So exosmosis is that like exiting. So the performance is about becoming soup, really, becoming goo, becoming slime, and what is the agency in that, and what is the effective capacity of kind of performing this annihilation. So this happens through kind of in the performance through kind of light, visuals, sound, vocals that Emma and I are working on together. There's an intravaginal microphone involved. There's lots of slime, and there's me attempting to exit a language, which, the performance of panic, the performance of subjective annihilation is complicated. Because if you're in panic, then it's impossible to speak panic. But if you're not in panic, it's also impossible to speak panic. But to communicate through an affective language is a whole other situation. So I guess this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to employ affective noise, affective vocalities or ictic vocalities in order to effectively communicate these kind of ideas about annihilation.
and we will get to ictic, what ictic is soon, but maybe I'll also ask about another project called Rupture, which you are developing with Jessie Boylan and Linda Dement, because I think that these two sort of projects sit side by side at the moment. Could you talk about what I guess, rupture, the central questions or the central proposition of rupture?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I'm like really, really blessed to be working with so many amazing people, and to have so many amazing people like willing to work with me is like, I don't know, it's very beautiful. And, you know, that being another one of those people is Lauren Abineri, a beautiful sound artist and road maker from Naarm, and Jessie Boylan, who lives in Dja Dja Wurrung country, and Linda, who's in Gadigal lands. And Linda, interestingly, you know, like has been in my life since the early days of cyber feminism, and made this project called Cyberflesh Girl Monster, where they were scanning different parts of people's bodies. And in that event, me and Sandy Stone became pixel siblings forever. So that's just up front there. But both Linda and Jessie have been working together doing fantastic work around Maralinga and other events in the Marshall Islands and so on. And Jessie was working on this project called Rupture beginning in 2018, and both Linda and Jessie decided that they needed an embodied kind of presence in the work. And Linda suggested me, knowing my work around panic. And so I met with Jessie, and we have formed like an unbreakable, you know, bond in this beautiful kind of sympoetic swamp across those years since 2018. So Rupture is very much kind of based in the idea of slow emergencies and geotrauma. And again, this kind of deep connection and between the body and the earth, and this kind of resonance of slow emergencies as like kind of manifesting as kind of geotrauma in the body. So that say the body floods with affect as the earth kind of floods. There are ruptures in the earth as there are ruptures in the body. So I guess we're just kind of trying to bring together this kind of the deep embodiment, this idea of kind of affective states in the world and in the body. So this happens through, again, these spaces are all very kind of based on affective resonance. So the sound, Jessie has done most of the sound, and you know, it's beautiful, it's deep, it's you know, there are kind of infrasonic and subsonic kind of resonances that if you are sitting in the space. So the first of the iterations of this was just a sound and video installation at Bendigo Art Gallery on a 13-minute loop with a number of screens and surround sound. But if you were sitting in that space, you could feel the infrasonic resonances through your body. So you become earth, you become geo, and you experience very bodily the traumas, you know, of the earth. And you know, there's a lot of kind of, it was around bushfire time. Well, it was actually kind of pre 2019, but we did actually do an iteration of it in bushfire times, and you were around for that. So yes, it's about as a body experiencing being earth and experiencing geotrauma. And this is an ongoing project, which also kind of bleeds into another project called Bone Dirt, which is about listening to rock. in a non-extractivist modality.
We can actually hear a lot of crows in the background as we speak. So I guess leading with rupture, and then also drawing in your current PhD research, both of those seem to sort of focus on this phenomenology of panic. And what your PhD is proposing is this concept of the shimmer body. Could you talk about what the shimmer body is?
Yes. So I'll just go back to something I said before, which was subjective evacuation. So the shimmer body is a very spectral entity. And this spectral entity is birthed through subjective evacuation. You'll find the shimmer to be utilized quite a little bit in various kinds of it has a lot of kind of theoretical and cultural kind of applications. Not a lot, but enough that I feel a kind of a connection to it. So some people use the shimmer when they're talking about bodies in cinema. There's also shimmer is used in affect theory a bit. Also, it is used in Yolngu painting practices to speak about biryan or brilliance, which is this kind of shimmer between, say, in crosshatched paintings, between the background and the foreground. So there's the field, and then there's the cross-hatching on top, and there's this kind of space between. And the cross-hatching kind of births this kind of biryan or brilliance, and it's this kind of very fast kind of movement between the foreground and the background, this kind of oscillation. And this is a kind of a embodied experience I have in panic, which is a kind of a visible, invisible, a switching, like a digital switching, an on-off, kind of a crossing of a kind of a liminal space, and then kind of potentially coming back into the body and then kind of evacuating again. So this kind of oscillation, this shimmer, this perpetual movement kind of bursts this kind of shimmer body. And that the shimmer body is like my problematic companion that, you know, I've lived with all my life. Like the shimmer body is always with me. I sometimes say it's like the creep living in your crawl space, you know, that you never really kind of come to terms with, but you build this kind of uneasy kind of, you know, relationship with, because you know that you have to live together. So yes, that it's like I can't see it. It's just at the periphery of my vision. It's very ghostly, and it's like it has its own life, if you like. Yeah.
And then so you merge or you become shimmer.
Yeah, I feel like you know, I birth the shimmer, and the shimmer body can also be birthed on the breath in this state of like falling out of the house of language. So again, as with like everything, you know, in my work and life, there's this idea of this kind of like in excess of myself, in excess of my body. And again, you know, there is this kind of, I think there is a contestation around this idea of any kind of split between, you know, spirit and body, or, you know, like mind and body or whatever. But for me, this is actually how I experience it. This is how I perceive it.
And coming back to the breath, the ictic voice.
Yeah.
What is ictic? What is the ictic voice?
So when I've kind of extrapolated on this term ictus, which is used kind of in medical kind of parlance, I suppose, to speak about a blow or to be seized. So it could be like a seizure or like a rhythm. And so I've applied it, I've kind of extrapolated on this idea of ictus, and it's become ictic. And it's a very kind of, so there's lots of plosives in that word to say. So I feel like it's very onomatopoeic, for want of a better term, if you like. And when I'm writing it, I often put interrobangs on either side of it to kind of give it a fright, a feeling of fright. So it's like, the k and the t, it's like ictic, and it's very, it's very kind of, and so I apply that to the idea of prosody. So the prosody of panic is like, it has a certain rhythm, and it's often like, because you can be seized by panic. And, like when you're kind of in a panic state, you might kind of, like be glottally stopped a bit. So you're kind of choking a little bit, and so there's lots of g and k, and and maybe some kind of sh, some soft plosives, some dento-alveolar kind of stuff, or like gritting of teeth. So there's lots of this kind of closing and opening and this kind of plosive, which is not any kind of language that we know. I'm not using order words. There's also the opposite of that, which is the disembowelment, or the kind of the where you're just R-ing or oohing or E or O-ing. So all the air is being evacuated in a kind of a moan or a groan or a howl. So there's these kind of different kinds of prosodies, and different kinds of things that happen in your mouth and your throat. So there's this massive kind of transformation of the whole kind of body, and you don't really feel like anybody that you know anymore, and that really applies to kind of the throat and the mouth and the breath.
So it's all of the sounds that sit outside of language.
Yes, the remainder, if you're kind of in a kind of Jean-Jacques Lecoq sense, I like to kind of play in the space of the remainder. Yeah.
And I want to sort of talk about affect as well, particularly around your writing, which you describe as affective writing practice, which we'll also hear a little bit later in the reading. What is affective writing?
So just prefacing this by saying I am no affect scholar, but it's something that, and same with phenomenology actually, it's like these two things that keep coming back to. It's like, phenomenology and affect. So various people speak about affect in various ways, and I am in the camp of affect theorists who, and I suppose this would be a Masumi camp, where there's this idea that affect is something which first hits the body and then cognition. So in that way, it's prediscursive. So in panic, I cannot say I am in panic. Or if I say I'm in panic, I'm not in panic. I can't speak panic. So my cognitive, my kind of, like everyday cognitive kind of faculties and my capacity to speak and communicate in an ordinary way, those things are offline. So some people are kind of interconnect affect, feeling, and emotion. So Sarah Ahmed talks about feeling and affect in a similar kind of way. But there's something I think which runs through affect theory, which like all affect theory, no matter like where you are on that kind of spectrum, and that is the idea of contagion, resonance. Sarah Ahmed would call that stickiness, and this idea that, and intensities, like these intensities which run through and between bodies, sometimes sticking, sometimes moving on. So my writing, I'm trying to reach a point where I can write in a way which is a vehicle for intensity, and that again is problematic because I'm starting to talk about triggers here. I'm starting to talk about triggering. And my supervisor the other day was reading one of my chapters and said, actually, it was really triggering and I nearly had to stop reading, but it was good, and I'm like, oh, it's difficult to operate in that space,
And a question is, how do you want to impact the audience? What do you want the reader to experience?
Yeah, I guess I want the reader or the audience to experience what I am experiencing. And again, maybe that's problematic. And, I often have these conversations with self and others about, whether there need to be trigger warnings and content warnings and stuff like that before potentially you come into a space where I'm performing, or like before you open something that I've written, a book that I've written. I've never written a book, but texts that I've written. I hope I write a book before I die. Yes. So it's like the text is a vehicle for these affective states, and I want it to hit the body before the cognition, and to have that kind of run through the fingertips and out through the fingertips like those vibrant tendrils and into like the bodies around. And this is also like trying to communicate the experience of marginalized bodies. So obviously, Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, queer theorist, used affect theory a lot to speak about the experiences of queer people that fall outside of, your kind of, your everyday, put on your human suit and go and face the machine kind of way. Yes, so just I want to communicate the experience of neurodivergent people. I'm also a queer non-binary person, and that there's absolutely no doubt that is also an inflection, and potentially one of the reasons why I am the way I am.
And how you write the way you
and
write.
As
a final question, because I think that this is a very important part of your practice, is the idea of collaboration. And you have described collaboration as your discipline, as a form of sympoiesis, and also a process of wounding and crisis. Could you talk about like what you mean by this and why collaboration?
I think firstly that collaboration is potentially the only ethical mode of creative production in late capitalism. It's really hard for a lot of people to produce under the conditions that they are forced to live in. As a person who is often doesn't have a lot of capacity for reasons, I know how I rely on and learn from those who work with me. So to me, it's a mode of kind of mutual aid, if you like, kind of creative production, mutual aid within kind of creative production. It lifts people up. It supports people with ideas. I think this drive to always produce the new is like, it just kills you. And it is part of the kind of arts industry, the system of the arts industry, which is like based a lot on this idea of grants. So you have to come up with a new idea for the grant, acquit it, quick, better generate another new idea, acquit it, generate another new idea, acquit it, rather than this idea of working slowly and over a long period of time, potentially just with one very simple idea. And for me, I am trying to just be simple and say less, even though I'm a really big talker. But I find support and political purpose in collaboration. Also, the idea of we are always working in collaboration. We are working with the quality of light. We're working during a bushfire. We're working while people are having somebody kneeling on their neck and being unable to breathe. We are working in collaboration with the social, cultural, and political conditions and ecological conditions of our times. We are never working alone. And anyone who thinks they're working alone is like, it's just not true. So it's this constant process of like letting go. When I'm working with the beautiful Ashley Haywood and Nick Taylor, who we had a Deleuze reading group for many years, and we stayed on one chapter for 4 years, and we wrote this kind of very swampy, and it's not finished, piece of writing that we wrote also for years on Google Docs simultaneously. So you're in this space where people are constantly writing into your writing and creating this kind of rupture and this kind of, it is a kind of a wounding. So it's always like in crisis, something is always coming in and creating a rupture within, your kind of, your words, and then you kind of assimilate that and homeostasis returns, and then another kind of rupture enters. So to me, that's this kind of this space of kind of collaborative and synchronous writing, and which I do with Francesca De Rimini as well. We do a lot of writing that's based on rules and constraints, and we give each other rules and we must write to them. And we've also done that with Amy Island. So just there's kind of spaces which, you have to abandon any notion of ownership, any notion of like authorial kind of control, any notion of like the singular genius, and they're extremely generative. You cannot know what's happening next. They're fecund. They're, we're composting, to use a kind of a Harawaiian idea. It's hot, it's fetid, it's messy, and it's like a generative. So, as I said, to me, it's the only kind of ethical production.
What a great way to end our conversation on the ethics of production. So maybe we'll give time for a reading of your work. What did you decide to read for us today?
Well, I thought I would read from the script of Rupture. It's not a, it's a ruptured narrative. So, Blair Athol. Now I remember. Standing outside at Blair Athol Station, west of nowhere, a noon night with my head flung back to fix my eye on a star, keeping both the horizon and the star in my field of vision, watching the earth turn. Standing there on the earth that seemed to me flat and like a plate about to break, so precarious was its spin, I disappeared into the eye of the infinity storm, a midpoint between nothing and everything, suspended between the two gulfs of the infinite and the void. I may be 12 years old, shivering, feeling vertiginous, sensing the shadows just beyond the curtain of dark. Why was I out in the dark alone? Maybe I was walking back with my dad from the Jenny and I dawdled, or maybe dark fell when I wasn't watching, dreaming in the Gidea. I felt alone in all the world. Family beyond reach, flying up, out into the void without a name. I was pure sensation, a flood of icy terror, a head coming off, a planet falling through space on fire. Every which way there were lines passing through me. Inside out, I turned, as above, so below. As the cosmos, so the interior universe. I am becoming the everything, vibrating in never-ending expansion and collapse. I am the star and the star is me. I am a million points of light above and below. I hold the cosmos in my terrified heart and it explodes all over my body. How many nerve endings do I have? How many stars are in the cosmos? There is nothing between me and the Milky Way. No, beyond that. Oh, but what is beyond the stars? I am falling, flying up into the never-where, the else-when, and it is blowing my mind. Panic. You wish this upon yourself, all this contemplation of the world as it is or the world as it seems, the structures we co-create. I am a building, I am a system, I am labor, I am value. I am space and time becoming. I am already exhaling for the last time. No more space taken up. I am an empty bed. I am no longer I. Suddenly, you don't know the world at all. You call your friend, they struggle to help, there is no way to help. You leap as if to run, but there is nowhere to run because the world is all one thing and it is ultimately unknowable. And you are sitting in the undifferentiated expanse, curled up, crying, crying for a body to return. You no longer know whether you are dead or alive, or you are simultaneously dead and alive, living every moment at once. You knew this time would come, was already here, was with you always. Multiplicity. Suddenly, the proposition of I seems implausible or just unthinkable, unsayable. We have reached the point where it is no longer of any importance whether one says I. We are no longer ourselves. We have been aided, inspired, multiplied. And yet, for those of us plagued by unrelenting panic, it feels necessary to drive this machine towards unity if there is to be any semblance of control, any capacity to function in the empirical world, the quotidian, knowable world. This drive to unify is ambivalent and feels also like a betrayal, since there is a gift in the dissolution that is clear. The gift that keeps on giving but is hard to take because the reach is far and frightening. The gift is one of expansion and extension, of seeing further than you could see before. It is a painful seeing beyond the visual. It feels like the end of all things. Indeed, is the end of all things as we know them. The gift is one of seeing as a river sees, or as the sky sees, or as a star or the forest floor, of seeing as all eye like the brittle star, or with no eyes like mud. This seeing expands and collapses, is breathtakingly vast or close, claustrophobic, inescapable. You see yourself ragged, falling, flying, fucked and fallible, rotting and machinic. You see suddenly all the machines at once and the infinite regression, proliferation of connection that is the realm of machines and assemblages. You see all these things simultaneously. Synthesis is not possible. Seeing becomes structural in its capacity to read the generative formations that underlie appearance. You see things as they are rather than as they seem. The seeing beyond the ocular is a direct knowing.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reading, but also for the great conversation.
Thank you
again.
for the great conversation.
So that, I think, will conclude our conversation of panic and annihilation, or of no relation.